We're live. So welcome anyone who's joining. Right now we have Daza Greenwood, John Wunderlich, and Mary Hodder on this hangout where we're talking about open notice, consent receipts, and the summer project in collaboration with MIT Media Labs. Daza will be joining us in a moment, but if you, John, would like to, Mary, would like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, that would be great. John?
Hey everyone. My name is John Wunderlich.
Anyone who's joining, right now we have Daza Greenwood, John Wunderlich.
I'm getting some kind of delayed echo here.
I think you have another window open, John. It's probably playing the live hangout. Consent receipts and the summer project. It happened to me last night. With MIT Media Labs.
There we go. My bad. Sorry.
Cool.
I got rid of the extra windows. My name is John Wunderlich. I'm a data privacy consultant here in Toronto, Canada, with a background in operations and working for regulators before I hung up my shingle as a consultant. And I'm working with the open notice people, Mark and Mary, hoping to surface the shenanigans that are going on behind the scenes in terms of what organizations are doing to their data, and stop calling privacy policies because they're not about privacy.
Thank you, John. Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Let's see. First of all, it's early in the morning here, so my apologies if I'm not as awake as everybody else. So I live in Silicon Valley. I live in Mountain View, and I have done some entrepreneurial things, founded startups and whatnot, and also have a background in usability and user experience. Work at Berkeley program and more recently I've been involved with Mark and John and other folks. Did the privacy hackathon in February in San Francisco, and I'm just very interested in figuring out how to convey to users, what is happening in a reasonable way, because I don't believe that they need to know everything. I think that's unrealistic, but anyway, I think we need to make things understandable, and certainly right now with notice and consent, that's not the case. And I guess the other thing I should say is I'm involved with the IDESG, which is the Identity Ecosystem Working Group, which is the working group for the NSTIC program. It's the National Identity Standards initiative that the U.S. government is doing, and so I'm the chair of the User Experience Committee there. So anyway, that's what I do.
Thanks, Mary. So myself, my name is Mark Lazar. I'm enjoying working with John, Mary, and Daza, and a lot of other people at the Open Notice Initiative. The Open Notice Initiative first came together around something called The Biggest Lie, which Parlanero from Common Terms is a campaign he developed to say that whenever we click I agree, we lie that we've read the terms of service, and that this is a big problem. People are giving away their data rights and don't have access to data controls. So we've been working, after put a few papers forward and dug into the problem, we've come up with a solution called the consent receipt, which is a lot like a transactional receipt, but whenever you give consent, you would get a receipt from a service provider, and that receipt would be in a standard format. So we're working with the Cantera Initiative in the Consent and Information Sharing Workgroup to create a standard format for consent and consent receipts, and we hope to work with the W3C in making that a global standard, so that would work across the internet and across different jurisdictions. And the idea with the consent receipt is that it would provide a common format to what are essentially closed privacy policies, in that they would then have be able to be systematically used by the end user, by the individuals, and automatically found whenever people want to use them. And that would enable people to manage their consent before they give it, during the consent, or after the consent, so enabling pre, during, and post-consent management. And what we're looking to do with the Open Notice Initiative is to involve a lot of other projects and organizations in the field to provide services using the consent receipt. So looking to work with trust frameworks, projects like Terms of Service Do Not Read, Common Terms, Tossback, and a lot of other policy projects, plus trust frameworks, EU privacy icons, stuff like the National Standards for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and what Mary's working with at IDSEG. And and then also to push the consent receipt into new emerging areas of Internet of Things with physical space receipts and the like. So that's a roundup, I guess, of what the consent receipt and the Open Notice project is about. We're looking, when Daza comes back, he's going to be giving us a introduction into the Clear button, which we believe is a great project to collaborate with. And the summer, we're Open Notice Initiative is looking to collaborate with the MIT Media Labs on a summer project to create a Open Notice registry. And to do that, we're having a hackathon in San Francisco, Tel Aviv, and Berlin with the Open Knowledge Foundation in July 12th and 13th. So if anyone wants to come along to any of those events or to come along to a virtual venue event, please do, and you're more than welcome. And with that being said, I think we can move right on into further discussing the collaborative project that we would like to hack this summer, which is creating or developing this Open Notice registry. So as you can see, John, I can see the map we've already started creating just a little earlier today for what the Open Notice registry would do. What we've discussed so far is how an individual needs to be able to keep their own consent receipts, so that it's very private and secure, as consent information is definitely personal information, and how they use a consent receipt. So besides being able to see all their consents on aggregate and withdrawing consent with a touch of one button, how would that happen? So the idea is you take a consent receipt to an Open Notice registry or server, and then you would be able to use that receipt with a whole bunch of third parties, one of them being Clear button. So what you see on the screen now is the Open Notice registry in the center, and it's showing how in the Open Notice registry we would have links to terms of services and privacy policies and perhaps cookie policies. And we were talking about one of the big issues in this space, which is these secondary or parties or these sub-processors who get personal information without having a direct relationship with the individual. So what we're looking at here is creating a space in the consent receipt for a link to a page of third parties. So an organization would put the link in, which would be put into the consent receipt, and on that page they would have a listing of their third parties, and those lists of third parties would go into the Open Notice registry. And then something like Clear button would be able to grab those links and send a notice to these third parties and request access to the data on behalf of the individual, and then those third parties can actually send information to the end user. So I think that's as far as we've gotten so far. John, did you want to add anything to that?
Just not really. You've captured what we're going for, which is to provide the customer, the website user, with a record so that it surfaces what it is that they've agreed to implicitly or explicitly when they surf to a website or have a transaction with a website, and providing an infrastructure whereby vendors can, in fact, start to compete on the basis of their data usage policies and make make claims that could be substantiated as to when they make that motherhood statement, your privacy is important to us. They'll be able to substantiate it in a meaningful way. So that's, to me, that's what this where we're going with this is to enable to bring out of the shadows all those. I mean, everybody laughs and says nobody reads privacy policies. Well, privacy policies are risk management exercises by enterprises, and I've written them and do risk management for my clients, and it's completely understandable that a privacy policy from that point of view is exactly what it is. You make an assertion, say this is what we're going to do with your information, and you write that from the point of view of the organization, avoiding risk by being as broad as possible, and say we're going to do whatever we can with your information, and if we can make money from it and you've given us your consent, that's cool with us. So I'd much rather have that to be an open and transparent relationship, whether or not, as some players in this space talk about, whether I should get a taste of that. The amount of money on any individual transaction for the individual is so minuscule until we start having sub-cent mini transactions. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. What's much more interesting to me is transparency and knowledge, so that I can know what's being done with my information. And I have an opportunity to say yes or no, and if this goes far enough down the road, to start to have a dialogue with the organization, and so that instead of just a singular broad consent, they may have to allow for the possibility of a granular consent, where two different users consent to two different things, and the website's okay with that, because now they've set up their system so that these users, we can do this with their data, and these users, we can do that with their data. And I hope that this is a road down that path.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's great. I think having what you like, as you mentioned, having transparency and in a standard way is really important, but not just so we can see what's going on, but so we can make choices and we can start controlling our data. And on that note, we work with the Cantera Initiative, the Consent and Information Sharing Work Group, where we've been working really hard to get together a first version of what we're calling a minimum viable consent receipt. And that minimum viable consent receipt is the minimum requirements for information for consent that are common across different jurisdictions. And by having this consent receipt, organizations are automatically partially compliant or have a much greater compliance or usability of compliance than what exists already. And this specification, we're aiming to make it open so that anybody can contribute to it and use it. And what's great is that we've just actually released it this last week. So that's really exciting. And part of what we're talking about with this consent receipt, which is really revolutionary, is that is how someone who doesn't have it can go to an organization and say, please give me a receipt for the consent I gave you 5 years ago, according to this law, and this law, which requires you to be open with your policies. And then companies, what we're estimating is more than 90% of companies don't have compliant, informed consents. And so in this circumstance, companies can go, look, we don't have a copy of a consent receipt, we don't know what policies we had, or what have you. An individual can then themselves update that consent, withdraw consent, or what's even really exciting is move that consent to a personal data store or a personal cloud. And I know at the MIT Media Labs they've been working with open personal data stores, which is like open source personal clouds. And here in the UK, there's a company called MyDex, which has personal clouds for people. And there's a lot of great new personal cloud and IndieBox sort of software. And with this consent receipt, we're using the law in order to change the control of data or to invalidate different profiles or different controls so that people don't have to log into every service provider and read every policy anymore, but they can start managing all of their consents on aggregate. So that kind of gets to the heart of the matter that we're working on here. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
Have to unmute. Sorry, I'm making coffee. Well, I think you and John have covered it really well. One of the things that I was thinking about that might be helpful for people today in terms of what's happening at MIT would be to talk about more generally how to get good collaboration between the lawyers and the engineers, the product people, the usability people. And so, I mean, I would kind of like to talk about that. But as far as describing the problem set around, open notice and consent receipts, I mean, I think you guys have kind of covered it. And, there's certainly lots of detail, and we could do a deep dive into what that is, but I think it's a good general description, what you just did.
Yeah, that would be great. I did get one question where so someone was asking where is all our data stored at the moment, and how does it actually look? Because I think it's very opaque right now for people. Very little understanding of what happens to data. So that is a question we could also.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. In fact, yesterday I was reading an article about companies offering to share data, and one of the things that's interesting over the years, I've been asking for companies for my data for more than 10 years, and nobody at a company wants to say no, we won't give you your data, right? That would just be a terribly bad PR, especially if it's in a public forum. So, but they always say, sure, we'll give you your data. How do you want it? In what format? And of course, nobody has that answer, right? First of all, it's unique to each company because they create their own data formats. They create their own databases usually, or at least they take open source databases and they modify them. So, what user is going to be able to say, I want my data in this format or that format? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I think we need to help with is figuring out the data portability issue, and specifically, how are people going to get their information? And then, of course, there's the problem of, is it in some usable form that it can go somewhere and make some sense? So it seems to me, I mean, I'm not proposing that the Open Notice group at Kantara or the Open Notice Initiative, necessarily solve that problem in a practical way. But I think that there are other groups like the Data Portability Group, which has been going now for 4 or 5 years and is based in California, and other entities that, we will partner with to help with this problem, because, there isn't, I mean, you can do the consent receipt and you can, excuse me, do, fix the notice problem at the beginning of that process. But if we don't have a good way not only to get the consent receipt built and make that portable, but also what to do with our data, we're not gonna solve this.
That's a great point. And it is worth noting that one of the common points to a consent receipt or common data controls across every jurisdiction is to access and rectify data. So it is a right in the EU. It's definitely in PIPEDA in Canada, and it's also in, I think, the FTC's guidelines. That people have the right to access and rectify personal information. And in some jurisdictions, if the information is not correct, people have the right to block the use of that profile or that data. So I think in the EU, they're definitely pushing forward on data portability. Well, what standards and how do we do that? So I think with the consent receipt project, we're definitely looking at making standard formats for consent, standard formats for listing third parties, and we'd like to combine with standard formats for data portability as well. So there's a big schema, a lot of schema action going on in this regard. Thanks, Marion. Okay, so we've got another session starting in about 10 minutes. So why don't we actually close and break down on this session, and then in 10 minutes start the next session, which will be on the hackathon and the collaborative project this summer with MIT. And that session is booked for an hour, but we expect it to take a half an hour, where we're just going to get some ideas down and do a little bit more practical work. John's already started a Clear Button, an Open Notes Registry project, which we can use for that. So if there's anything else, please let me know. If not, we can stop this call. All right. Okay, John, I'll talk to you in a minute.